All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Clark Art Talks. My name is Kendra Larson, and I am the Archer Gallery Director and Clark Art Talks Coordinator. Today, we are lucky to have Ilana Zweschi here. Ilana Zweschi is an artist working in Seattle, Washington. She attended Skidmore College, graduating summa cum laude in 2011, where she was an art major and a mathematics minor. In 2014, she earned a Master of Fine Arts in Painting from State University of New York in Albany and receives the Departmental Thesis Award for her oral defense. She is currently represented by Foster White Gallery in Seattle and is a visiting associate professor at Cornish College of the Arts. Zweschi has exhibited expansively, recently completing a large-scale commission for the Meta Open Arts Program, which is a part of the Microsoft Art Collection, or she is a part of the Microsoft Art Collection and receives the Dash Artist Grant for 2022. Notable group shows include Tiger Strike's Asteroid in New York, Museum of Museums in Seattle, and Out of Sight, a survey of contemporary art in the Pacific Northwest. Her work has been published in the number 145 Pacific Coast issue of New American Paintings, a Young Space interview, and featured on the opening page of the culture section of the Seattle Met in 2020. Ilana Zweschi, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your college and to share my work with everybody. It was so great to be able to get to know you and connect with you in this way. Yeah, so thank you all for joining. I will get started by sharing my slide presentation. Okay, so I began with this slide so you could see kind of, if you're unfamiliar with my work, a kind of general overview that I make abstract oil paintings that are very colorful and look pretty straightforward, but they've got a lot of layers to how they get made. So I'll dive into that. So I'll give a brief overview of my process, and then I'll actually go back to the beginning and kind of work my way up to how I got here. So I make these paintings that are that translate text into painterly actions. So I'm writing handwritten algorithms that take the letters of the text, assign meaning to them that have visual outcomes, and then can produce these abstract paintings with them. So the painting on the left is very large. It's about 5 feet tall, so it's much larger than the A4 piece of paper that the text is printed on. And one brushstroke in the painting equals one letter in the text. And so as I complete each letter in the text, I mark it off. And that's how I end up with these text pieces that get filled with paint. That's why the brushstrokes in the painting are these discrete unblended elements, because they're acting like this cellular element in the same way that the letters of the text are acting like a cellular element for the word. So I'm using a lot of systems, but there's also a lot of kind of philosophy in there as well, which I'll get into. But I'm going to back up and show you some of my older work. I always, if I'm talking to undergrad students, I think it's fun to share my undergrad work because you never know where your work is going to end up. And the key is to just keep making, and eventually you'll kind of find the thing that really works for you. And for me, I think it took a while, but I did get there. So I'll show some of the older work. I'm going to start with this one because it's the oldest painting that I have, and I can't remember when I made it, but I'm guessing around middle school. And I like this one because it just shows that I have always been committed to being a painter. That's been a part of my identity for as long as I can remember, and I haven't been able to veer off of that course, despite studying and enjoying other things. Painting has always been a part of the thing that has been like a passionate driver for me. So I'll show some of my undergrad work now. This is a painting that maybe happened in like an intermediate painting class where the professor would get a model and kind of set up a space for them. And this one really illustrates how much I love the act of painting. So I really did well under these conditions because I didn't have to come up with the imagery. and really just got to enjoy just making the painting. And I love making paintings so much that that became a distraction for me. And I was not able to consider anything else about the how or the why of the painting, because I just wanted to get to the painting part. So it was easy when I had a model in front of me, but it became harder when I had to come up with my own imagery. So then I experimented with painting myself. So I, was taking my own photos, and I was looking for like interesting poses and interesting light. Some of them really were unsuccessful. This is maybe one of the more successful ones. I'm still experimenting with these like loose brush strokes that were accumulating in a way that was uh, creating structure, kind of a geometric structure in the figure. But I still was very distracted by the active painting and didn't really want to think too much about any other element to it. And then I started experimenting with making the brushstrokes looser, more energetic, and putting the figure in liminal spaces. This painting happened actually post-grad, so there's definitely a skill difference between the two. But I was wrestling with the same issue of, I want to paint the figure, then what else do I do? And so I tried mirroring the figure to create this this kind of more surreal effect of how the figure was living in space. And then I started working with patterns, which was not really that different from what I was doing, because it was still like, I'm going to simplify what's happening behind the figure so I could just focus on the figure. But the pattern making themselves were the catalyst for how I ended up working with systems. So they were much more significant than they seemed at the time. And Kendra had mentioned that I was an art major and a math minor, but I had not figured out a way to combine those two things. I wasn't even trying to combine those two things. I just liked math, and I knew I was going to be an art major, so I did that first. And then I was like, I miss math. Why don't I take some more math? And it was just a way to just like, I just found it interesting. But at no point was I like, oh, I should make math in my paintings. I didn't even know you could. And so working with patterns where there's inherent math built into them is where I was able to bridge that gap between something I liked and something that I could really make a meaningful part of my life. So in this figurative or in this pattern, I was trying to figure out a way to simplify the way that I was making the pattern. Because at first I was looking them up online and trying to copy them, and that was like way more effort. And I realized that the hexagon has a bunch of shapes inside of it, so I could just take a hexagon and overlay it on top of itself, and I could find triangles and diamonds and trapezoids. And then I could very quickly, very simply make a pattern with that one shape. And then I simplified it even further. So look at the pattern in the background of this. And you'll see that it's mostly triangles, and there's some other funky shapes in there, but they look like they're maybe made of triangles, right? And then I realized that I could simplify this even further. So I could take this shape that came from a grid, and then you just divide the square of the grid and get two triangles. And then that one section of triangle could be rotated, and there's 4 possible orientations for this triangle, which you could label A, B, C, D, decide which order you want them to come in. And then I just made one rule. So I have one shape and one rule. And my one rule was that as I moved down a row, everything got moved over to the left by 1 unit. That was it. It was one rule. And that made this pattern, which is way more complex than if I had tried to make this pattern, it would have taken a lot more effort than just this one rule. And I didn't know what it was going to be. I also could discover it. And to me, this pattern that resulted looks like tree branches or maybe bamboo coming off of a central stalk, which is just so much more interesting than the original conditions started out to be. And I found out later that this is a system that already exists. It's something that quilters use to be able to create complex patterns just by adding up a bunch of squares that were divided into 2 triangles. And that there's actually whole levels of deep math that is related to this as well, in terms of cellular automata. So these are cells, and they can have different rules to them, so they kind of look like they have agency. Generative imagery and chaos theory. So these are all things I'm trying to more formally learn. But any of that I might have learned in school has long left me. And what's lingering is just this interest and kind of natural way of thinking in systems. So once I started working with systems, everything became easier about painting. Like I could enjoy the act of painting, which I always did, but I didn't struggle so much with what do I put in the painting, because if you're working with systems, you don't decide, right? I'm like, I was just relinquishing that decision entirely to the system, where I could write the system and then the system decided. So this is the first one that I made from text. So it's a first pure abstract painting that came from text. But the key element here is that I was painting over a figurative painting. And this is actually something my abstract or my advanced painting students are doing right now, where they're painting over old paintings of theirs. And I think that this is one of the best conditions to make a painting under, because you have so many shapes to work with. And if you really hate that painting, then you get to like eliminate it off of the face of the earth. And I actually couldn't find an image of what this painting looked like originally, and I'm kind of glad there isn't one because it sucked. So I got to transform it entirely. So this is a big painting. It's 4 foot by 4 foot. I put a 6-inch by 6-inch grid on top of it. And then I took a text that was deliberately random. So like I was rolling dice, and the dice would tell me which book to pull from my bookshelf and which page to pull from that book. So I was picking one that I had no control over and had no significance other than the fact that it was random. So the letters themselves didn't matter. So then I made the secondary document that would just count the number of letters that fell into a particular category, would highlight the ones that fell into a different important category, the end of sentences, the doubling of letters, things like that. Things that had an associated meaning with them would have this key that would tell me when they cropped up, but I didn't actually need to know what the original letter was. And this is actually almost exactly the way that I work now, even though this was the first time I ever made it. And this was in 2014, so it's 10 years ago. And I'm still doing it almost exactly this way now. So what I would do was I would start in a grid section, and I would take white paint and just start covering up the painting that was underneath, and it would rotate around. And each time it went around the outside of the grid section, that would count as one letter in the text. So that was one brushstroke equaling one letter. And I would continue that until a moment in the text would tell me to stop and find an image from underneath. So all of the shapes that you see came from the figurative painting underneath. And there was this combination of figurative elements that would be organic, and then the geometric elements from the pattern. And it was also really good that I had both to work with. And then sometimes, there'd be other aspects where sometimes then I would be told to then paint that section red instead of leaving it a window, or I would make it a linear shape instead of a filled in shape. So there were other rules that I could just increase in complexity if I wanted to. But I ended up with something that was so fascinating to me, because I didn't know what it was going to look like when I started. And usually that's the opposite of the way that we work. Usually we get a picture in our head, and then we try to get that picture to end up on the canvas. And that just wasn't working for me, because that is creativity. And you think if you're going to be a painter, you should be creative. And actually, that's not true. If you're going to be a painter, you can be logical. And that worked so much better for my brain that I could start I could avoid a lot of struggle that I had been engaging with prior to this. And that's what's been able to sustain me. But I had to bridge that gap, because we are told that math is logical and painting is creative, but actually they're both. I mean, math is incredibly creative when you get into the really high levels of it. So this was a significant turning point in my paintings. So this is another one that I made where I changed the visual rules a little bit to make the grid less obvious. So this is another large one. It's 5 feet tall. And before I applied the grid, so I made a figurative painting, and then I outlined all of the negative space with these big concentric areas. And then I put the grid on top of it. So the grid had to kind of contort around the negative space that got filled in. I call these roadblock paintings, because the negative space kind of created this roadblock where the grid shape had to contort around. And so that's how you got this like there is a presence of a grid, but it's super funky, and it kind of comes and goes in clarity. And then this is the only one that I have like a really good image of what was underneath and where it ended up. So I'm glad I have this one, but I wasn't good about documenting that at the time. I think because I just wanted to get rid of those paintings. I was like, get out of my life. So I was still making figurative painting with a pattern in the background. And then the system just started to swallow the figure. And the figure is getting truly cannibalized, and the parts of it get digested and transformed, and parts of it kind of remain as an output for the image. So if you saw this painting on its own, you would think it was abstract, but knowing that it came from a figurative place, you could maybe start to see, oh, that looks like hair, that looks like a hand, that looks like an armpit, right? Because that's what it is. And so then I could get an abstract language that had incredible specificity to it, which is the hard thing about abstraction, is that we're like, I've got all of the basic shapes, circles, squares, triangles, but where do you go from there if you're inventing? And really, you don't have to invent. You can just borrow from life, which is what I'm doing. So the fact that I was a figurative painter is still very significant in the work that I make today, but I'm not a figurative painter anymore. So I'll define algorithm a little bit to maybe help visualize this process. So it really is just about a series of inputs and outputs. So in my case, the input is written text, and then the output is an abstract visual language that I have developed. This took several years to develop. You can't just like have one because you're inventing it. That does require invention. But it happened naturally over the course of making these paintings. So I have things like rainbow squiggle, high contrast line, like I've got these elements that that are just a part of my visual language that I can quantify and then associate with parts of the text. So the text itself would have if-then statements associated with it. So if you encounter an E, or if it's a vowel, if it's a consonant, if it's capitalized, right? There's all these ifs. And then the thens would say, then paint a rainbow squiggle, or then skip it and check the next text, right? So you could see I was working with two different texts. So I could kind of have these endless iterations of like if-thens, 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 and then there would be this output on the end that would say, paint a rainbow squiggle right here. So I didn't have to make any decisions. I could decide how I wrote the algorithm, which could be based, I could write the algorithm in a way that could guide it towards a particular visual outcome that I wanted. Like I wanted certain things to be rare. I wanted certain things to be abundant, and I could associate them with rare and abundant parts of the text, but I didn't actually get to control how it came out. So I got to be surprised and discover as I was painting. And it really felt like then I wasn't painting it, or that I was only partially painting it, which removed the burden of authorship, which is, I think, a great relief. So I'll explain this one a little more. So I was working with text. Eventually, I started working with texts that had meaning to them. So this is where the philosophy starts to come in, which I'm still kind of hazy about how I articulate that to others, although it's very clear for myself. So, just working with language, I naturally started finding these text documents that I had felt were causing a lot of harm in the world. And they're official, right? So that it's not like, oh, some nonsense book that nobody's ever going to read. I'm taking things that are laws. I'm actually working specifically with laws right now. And laws do the job of telling what the society values, right? There's this incredible link between the value of the society and the value of the law. Oh, sorry. I've got these aggressive updates. I don't know what's happening right now. Okay, let me try that again.
That happens to me sometimes too.
Yeah, like the computer's like, you must update now. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of something. Okay, are we back on track? Everybody can see?
Yep, looks good.
Cool. Okay, so I'm working with official documents that have real consequences in the world that I think are bad and that need to be critiqued. And they're current things and not things that existed in the past where we're all like, we all agree that they were bad, right? So I'm very specific about where these come from, but I'm not specific about what they are because I don't want to isolate people to my politics. And I want people, instead, what I'm trying to do is to get the viewer to consider where they might be seeing this for themselves of, okay, this is something that has a significant impact on society and it needs to be critiqued and it's not being critiqued, right? I think everybody's got their own relationship with that. So I was really trying to disempower this text because it was so powerful and I had no ability to do anything about it, right? I'm not a politician, I'm not a lawyer. I don't, what can I do? I'm an art teacher. I'm a painter. What can I do? And I could take the letters of the text and reorder them. This felt incredibly empowering. So each sentence, so again, I'm using systems. So this line 3 was associated with this line 3 over here, which was written in a way that was legible to begin with. And I took all the A's and put them at the beginning, and then the B's and the C's. And I just re-alphabetized. And I did this by hand. So I must say, I'm not using computers in any part of this process. Algorithms are the language of computers, but they predate computers. Algorithms exist in all kinds of things outside of computers. And I am not a computer person. So I think there probably is a computer program that could alphabetize letters for me, but I'm doing it by hand. And that actually feels like a labor of love. And that's where I feel like the feeling of empowerment comes from, because I can watch the harmful speech in this get dismantled letter by letter. And I end up with this document that is complete nonsense, right? Absolutely harmless, couldn't harm a fly. And I just loved that I could have the power over that. And that was the one that became that yellow painting at the beginning, which actually I forgot to put that slide back in, so I'm sorry. You remember it. Okay, and then so here's another one where you can watch the colors in the text go from being light to dark, and the painting is doing that too. So this is emphasizing that I have different zones in the painting where they have different rules. So the outside of the painting in this one, the rules were to keep the shapes undynamic, right? If there was a shape that occurred, it would be small and would have to recover back to a vertical line, and low contrast. And then the opposite would be true in the middle. And I'm still putting figurative drawings at this point. They're not paintings anymore, but I'm still putting figurative drawings underneath. And all of the shapes that you see came from the figurative drawing underneath. It's just a moment, and so it gets abstracted from its context, right? So this might have been, the line of a forearm or something, and I just pulled a little line from that, and then these concentric lines kind of build out from there. And anytime you see a vertical line, that's where the algorithm was telling me to ignore or cover what was underneath. So the vertical lines are the language of the algorithm, and then the shapes are the algorithm picking up from the image underneath, which could be, you could also describe it as like scraping the algorithm across the seed image. So I need the seed image under there to get all of the shapes. So I'm still working with the figure, and the figure is a great thing to work with because it's organic and complex, and that's what I need. And I had 1 million photos from being a figurative painter. I started hiring nude models, and I had like 700 photos that I'd paid for, and I was like, these better go to use. So for a while, I was working from the outside in, and so everything was kind of collapsing in, which was not something that I intended, but it's something that occurred from the system. I've got a detail shot of this one. These are large 5-foot paintings. Most of them are between 4 and 5 feet. And I like the close-up of this so you can see how textured it is. I'm working with really thick paint, but you can also see that it's imperfect, right? So if you look at this painting from far away, you think that it was really meticulous and perfect, and maybe I'm taping or using rulers, and it's kind of mechanical. And you get up close, and you realize that it's not mechanical; it's very human, and that the lines kind of wiggle and woggle, and there's not a perfection to it up close, and that kind of reveals the humanity, which Agnes Martin does that in her paintings, where you stand back and you're like, it's very cold and calculated, and you get up close and you can see the humanity in it, and there's something kind of nice about that discovery. And these are the text pieces that I was using from that. Again, I was alphabetizing. And then the original text piece gets completely covered. And so they're both illegible and disarmed. And then this is the biggest painting that I've made. It's on 3 panels. It's about 10 feet across. And so for a while, I was working from the outside in. So the image was collapsing in on itself. And then I started, this is from 2019, or 2020. And then this is from 2022. So a couple of years difference. Then I started working from the inside out, and that's where the shapes started exploding out from the center. So depending on how I oriented the system, I could get a different imagery, which kind of only came through discovery, right? Just iterations that then I could start to be decisive. Like, do I want them to collapse in, or do I want them to explode out? And this is mostly what I'm doing now, is the exploding out. And then the underpaintings changed too. So I stopped using my own underpaintings. I ran out of paintings to cover up, for one. And then I also realized, like, oh, I don't have to come up with my own compositions. Like, why am I coming up with my own compositions if I'm just gonna like significantly alter them anyway? So I started just looking for other paintings that I thought had interesting shapes in them, and using those. So this is the underpainting from this painting. Okay, so I'm also systematizing color. If you've ever been one of my students, you would not be surprised to hear this. I make all of my students learn color systems that they have to apply in their paintings. And that teaching comes from my own studio, where that's what I'm doing I'm just telling you what I'm doing in my own paintings. So this is a picture of me in my studio with my palette, and my palette is incredibly organized and planned, and it's based on color theory systems, uh, were a starting point, but then eventually I started inventing my own. And then the system itself is very compatible then with the color system because they're both systematized. And then I started making these charts that would tell me the most basic colors of the painting, the largest color shifts, because for a while I was using like one main color. And so I could understand the behavior of that color, but then I started working with these bigger color shifts. And so I wanted to see what the gradients would look like, and then what the accent colors would look like. So these are the color schemes for the significant paintings in the show that I just had, which I'll show some images from. So it's not all of the colors in the painting, but it's the significant color scheme. So I am planning the colors ahead of time. I think that color needs to be respected and should be planned ahead of time. And that the behavior of it's never completely predictable. And so that's where the chart can help you know what's going to look like. I also have done this with music. So I've only done it once. It was for a special commission, but it was so easily compatible that I could go in and out of using music if I wanted to. And that's because the musical notes are using letters, right? No problem translating there. But there's one really cool thing about working with music is that it's measured in wavelengths, and like each musical note has its own wavelength frequency that defines it. And that's true of color too, where each individual color has its own wavelength frequency that defines it, which you can measure. You can have these tools that can measure, and then you can make them compatible. So what musical notes have the most similar frequency to the color? So that's this chart that you see at the top, where F is purple and G is red and A is maybe orange. I think I filtered them a little bit through the yellow. And then I filtered them significantly through yellow because I got a yellow painting from it. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? I guess I'll take questions at the end. But if anybody has anything they want me to like linger on longer, you can stop me. Okay, so now I'll show some images from this show that I just had at Foster White Gallery in Seattle in August, titled Beauty and Violence, which I think kind of sums up really the conceptual things that I'm working with right now. So I told you about all the process things, and now I'll talk to you a little bit about the conceptual things. And then I'll end by telling you what I'm doing in my studio so recently that I did it yesterday and then put in the photos last night. So now we're getting like really close in time to what I'm doing right now. Okay, so this is a photo from my show. I wanted to start with this one because it's so cute. I've got identical twin girls that are 3 years old. And this is them showing up for my artist talk, which is why the chairs are out, eating cookies and being cute. And then, and actually, Kendra, I think you have a son named Ollie, and I have a daughter named Ollie. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
what's the other one's name?
Zazie.
Oh, cute.
So I always, whenever I see you post about him, I'm like, oh, Ollie,
Oh,
near and dear to
that
my heart.
show's amazing. Look at that. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. It's a great space. Yeah, I mean, it photographs really well because it's such a great space. Yeah, so there were 25 new paintings. It's hard to photograph because there's this curved wall. So it's along the curved wall, and there was some more back here. 25 new paintings that are all along this theme of beauty and violence. So the term actually came from this structure that I developed that accidentally kind of captured this theme that I was working with conceptually. So I'll show you what I'm talking about in terms of visuals, but then it also is related conceptually. So I started building up, instead of working with the gravity all being towards the center of the painting, I started working so that the painting kind of built up from the bottom. And I was doing that not thinking about a bouquet of flowers, but that is kind of what a bouquet of flowers is doing. And then there's this like geometric snake structure that kind of holds the shape of each line. So the snake structure underneath is kind of acting like the grid. You know, it's like I still need the grid because the grid is creating cells that tell me where I'm painting, right? Normally in a painting, we just kind of paint all over, but I still need to use the grid because it's like in cell number 1, I'll have these rules, but in cell number 6, I'll have these other rules. So that's where this kind of geometric structure came from. And then it's getting more complex as it goes to the top, as opposed to getting more complex as it goes towards the center. But I found this Diego Rivera painting to be my underpainting. And I chose it just because I loved all the squiggles in those lilies, right? I was like, cool, squiggles, done, right? Like it was not more complicated than that. But I was surprised to find the result of this painting looked like a bouquet of flowers, which is what it is. But I'll show this one now because this is the one that really gave me the idea. But it also looked like a mushroom cloud. And that felt really poignant to me because is it beautiful or is it violent, right? Does our life consist of bouquets of flowers or does our life consist of mushroom clouds? And what is the nature of humanity, right? To be beautiful or to be violent? And the answer is both, right? I mean, this just felt like such a like poignant reflection on reality and perception, right? And how are you perceiving it? Are you perceiving it as flowers? Are you perceiving it as mushroom clouds? Or are you kind of living in the reality of both and that it's not a paradox, even though it seems like it might be? So anyway, I loved that. And then I've got this image here that shows how similar those two structures are, right? And so it really felt like both. And all the kind of squiggling activity felt that way. And then that became a starting off point to change the structure of the imagery, right? So I'm kind of slowly evolving. Where I'm still working with these separated brush strokes. They can't be blended. But I have started to free them. So they're rooted in the grid space, but they got more free as I've got more confident with how they could behave written into the system. And then the underpainting, that was the only time an underpainting had such a significant impact on the result of the painting that usually they don't. They feel more neutral. So I made several of these for the show. And then I looked back at these other paintings that happened before those mushroom cloud paintings, and I was like, these are also beautiful and violent, right? Are they like an explosion of excitement and confetti, right? Sometimes my marks feel a little bit like confetti, and it's like, oh, so joyful. And then sometimes it looks like an explosion of destruction and shrapnel, and is it one or the other, or is it both? And I really think that, yeah, that it's both. Okay, here's another one that does that. Okay, and then I'll talk about the text. So I have been playing around with revealing words in the text that are violent. So that was something that happened before the mushroom cloud discovery, but it perfectly paralleled it. So, I told you I was working with texts that I thought were harmful, and then I found a few texts that had actual overt violent language in them. And so I was highlighting these words that could be used to be focal points in the painting. So this is the text for this painting. And anytime you see a high contrast moment, that was a what I call a keyword, which was highlighted and was significant. And then if I cover up the rest of the words, the words that are left make a poem of violence. And it felt to me like I could kind of like disguise the origin as to avoid isolating viewers who didn't agree with my specific origin spotlight, but that they could relate to kind of the sentiment behind it of where is there violence that's hidden that I'm kind of like exposing. Because these are not documents that are about violence, right? They're actually ones that are kind of about order and civility, right? Laws are about civility. Like we're trying to live in a civilized society that has order and everybody's allowed to thrive. And there's actually laws and legal documents that have a lot of violence in them. So that's what I'm working with right now. I don't have a lot because this is new to me, and it's hard to find one that has like the right kind of language in it. But there's a few. And these were all used to make paintings in the show. Okay, so I want to, before I move on from this, I want to say that sometimes people are like, why don't you make paintings about nice things, right? Like why am I like intentionally going into like the belly of the beast of like things that I think are terrible in the world? And I actually think that this is not an act of hopelessness or disillusionment or being jaded. I actually think this is the opposite, where if I can take things that I think are causing harm in the world, but I'm powerless to do anything about, and manipulate them and cover them up and expose them in different ways and transform them into these big, beautiful, colorful paintings. That's where my power lies. And I can subvert them, and I can get power back over them. And so I actually think that this is an act of empowerment and joy. And yeah, so to me, that like this is the positivity. This is me being an optimist. It's like the world can change and get better. And so this is my part of it. Okay. So palette cleanser. I'm gonna move on to something that is what I'm doing right now, which is completely just about like discovery and interest, and not at all about kind of the heavy world stuff that we live in. Because my work has both, right? So I'm working with generative imagery, which is what I was doing, but it was not such an overt part of what I've made, because the generative quality of it happened kind of moment by moment as the painting got built. So I'm practicing right now trying to make generative imagery that is the starting point of the painting. So I'll define that for you. Generative art is art that leverages a non-human autonomous system which can help generate features in the artwork that would otherwise be left up to the artist to decide. So again, I'm kind of relinquishing decisions, and I'm bringing in something that is that's non-human and autonomous, which is that it has no like brain or soul, right? So AI, of course, is a generative tool, but I'm going much more basic than that. So I'll show you that. Sorry, there's the images of the other participants made it so I couldn't read. Okay. So I found this funny little guy who is a drawing machine for kids. My poor kids. Wait, oh, sorry. My poor kids had to watch me order this, and then they couldn't play with it because it was for me. And I just loved this so much because it's clearly following an algorithm. Right? So this is something that is a non-human system that is following an algorithm to draw, right? And drawing is like the most human thing you can do, right? Humans have been doing it. We're constantly drawing in one form or another, writing, mark making. And so it's such a human thing to do. And so it's so funny to watch a machine do it. So I got one of these little guys, and I started playing around with it in my studio and seeing how I could put these cards in and make a system for how those cards could still draw their little marks, but that became abstract and looked more along the language that I was creating. So this one I would just kind of like start it, and then I'd pick it up while it was drawing and change its orientation, and then I'd take the card out and put a different card in. Like this one was just a sheep and a dandelion. This one was a frog and a sushi. So then I got these like totally weird drawings. And then just yesterday, this is what I did in my studio yesterday, I made a much more systematic approach. This one was more intuitive. I just kind of wanted to see what the machine could do. So this one, I went much more systematic. So you can kind of see the behind scenes here a little bit. So I'm working with it's ultimately going to be a 4 foot by 4 foot square painting. So I worked with a square that I could divide into these 1-inch grids. And I knew that I wanted the painting to be more complex towards the center and the bottom. So I created these 3 zones, right? There's the outside, which is going to be less complex. And then there's the core, which is going to be the most complex. And then a transition period, right? So that's the difference between the white, the pink, and the orange. So those are the zones of the painting. And then there are different behaviors that this machine could take. So it could be, it had 8 different ways that it could be oriented. It could be placed on any one of these axes of the grid. And then it could also be oriented into 8 different directions. So I used a random number generator, which I always go back to those when I'm like, I just need a fast, easy system. And the random number generator would tell me where to place the drawing machine and where it was going to be oriented. And then I had other factors like I repeated numbers in the center of the image so that the center of the image would be more likely to occur as a location that the drawing the drawing machine would end up. So I could increase the complexity there. And then I also have this text underneath, so that says dumb creatures over and over again, which is going to be the title of the piece that is actually taken out of old law language. We don't use this language anymore, but that used to be what the law would refer to any creature that has no language. And which will have a significance that I'm still kind of working out. But so there's kind of significance to the letters, but then the letters got numbers, and then they would get occasionally covered up with this blue tape. So here's my little guy doing his thing. And then I picked 24 cards. So the system would decide where he was going to be placed, what card was going to be used, how long the card could run for, because I sometimes wouldn't let him draw the whole shape. And then I could kind of bias the system to have increased complexity towards the center, which is what I need. And then this is the drawing that I ended up with. I think I'll do a few more iterations to get some more shapes in there, but it did do the thing I wanted it to do, which was to increase complexity towards the center. Although I think I want to put some more in there. Yeah, so that's what's next for me. Just finishing that solo show, I was just in such a production painting mode that I'm like finally back. And then after that, I commissioned, so I did like really just be like making work and producing. And now I'm in a space back where I'm thinking. So I feel like I'm in a new sort of revolution of where I'm going to go next. And that's it. So thank you everybody for listening. And I can take some questions. Zoom claps.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Questions. Are there any questions? If anybody has one, a question that you want to type into the chat, I'm happy to read them.
Well, can we just ask it directly, Kendra? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's totally fine too.
Cool. Great talk. It's so wonderful to hear you talk about your work. So my question is, when you're talking about the color system that you created, I'm wondering what was missing from what you'd studied that made you want to create your own system?
Yeah. Oh boy, I've got 1,000 things I could say on that. Do you have 3 hours? Just kidding. My poor students are like, oh my
Talk
God.
about color, yes.
I think that our color theory education is really bad.
Mhm.
As far as I've been able to partake in other people's color theory lessons, my color theory education was bad. I think what's bad about it is that color doesn't get respected as being a complex and important creature in and of itself. And so it will get thrown into other classes where you're like, oh, you're going to learn painting. Well, okay, then probably you'll talk about color and painting. And so then your color is covered, right? And so it's not treated as like its own subject matter. Or like the painting classes I took, I did take the color theory class and it was all theory. And so there was no information or real clarity about how to take that theory and turn it into an art practice, right? So the theory is interesting, but that's not the same thing as like being an artist that can use color. So that's one downside, I think, of color theory education. And then is bridging the gap between theory and practice. And then in painting classes where you are actually using color to make painting, my education was like, just paint the thing the color that it is, right? It was like, if it's red, use some red. If it's blue, use some blue. And like, there's not a better recipe for making boring color than that, right? Like it could not be more boring. It's not going to be unified. And then you're at the mercy of what is in front of you, right? Where you're like, I didn't set up this still life. Maybe the colors are boring. How can I make them more interesting? So, and then you learn about things like, oh, an analogous color scheme and a split complementary color scheme. But it's like, what do you actually do with that in terms of turning it into a painting? So there's a great color theory teacher in Seattle named Kimberly Trowbridge, and she kind of started this lesson that I got access to, which kind of led me on my own path of like, no, we really need to be limiting our color to create a color identity that can be translated through any image that you're looking at. So you're not going to be bound by the colors you're looking at, and you can choose the mood. And all it takes is a translation. So if you don't have red in your palette and you're painting a red object, use the color that's the closest to red, and you're keeping the same, maintaining the same relationships, but it's being filtered through a mood that you get to choose that is unified because you're limiting to only 3 colors. So that was the thing that I got from a wonderful color theory teacher here, but then I turned that into, I expanded that by actually the opposite word, I focused it where I would start with limited palettes, but then I would focus them. This is something that I just taught to my advanced painting class. That I invented a palette called the dominance and crescendo palette, where I'm taking one of those three colors, making one of them dominant, and then making a dominant value, and then allowing one of the other three colors to be a high contrast. So it's happening in this painting, right? So there's the dominant color of red, and then the crescendo color of green, where it's very high contrast, but happening in very rare moments. But it's crescendoing by building up in small areas, mixed throughout in ways that you might not even be aware of, right? It's mixed in such small quantities, you're not really aware of it, but it kind of justifies it once it is pure. So you're kind of holding back and being incredibly restrained and restricted. And then when you release that, it becomes super powerful. So that was something that I developed just by like having that practical application of a limited palette, and then giving it an even stronger identity to allow these like moments to be really loud in the context that you've created for it. So good question. Thank you.
I'll just add that Kimberly Trowbridge is going to be doing an artist talk and workshop on May 1st
She's
at Clark.
amazing.
So at Clark on May 1st, if anybody wants to join us, it's going to be from 10 to 12:20.
Is it in person?
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. So here's my little shout out. I didn't even know I was promoting your future event, but I would like to promote it. She'll change your life. Please. Please attend. Yeah.
I have a kind of a question. The piece that you have up right now. I know you're kind of more recently collaborating with the drawing machine, but are you going to continue this practice of weaving in art historical pieces too?
I don't know. I mean, that's a question I've been asking myself. I mean, it took me 3 hours to get to this point yesterday. Go, 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 go. Right? Where it's like, that's not a lot to show for 3 hours of effort. And so as I was doing, because you have to wait 2 minutes for the machine to do its thing. It's slow. The drawing machine is slow. That's maybe I could find a faster one, but that's what takes so long. And all the calculating, right? It would take me 30 seconds just to figure out where he was going to be placed. And, if I just start with an image that already exists, then I don't have to wait. So I've got a luxury of time right now because I don't have any deadlines. And so I can take 3 hours to make an underdrawing as opposed to like using one that already exists. And so I'm gonna follow this through and see if this process is different and interesting enough that it's worth taking the time, or if I can figure out how to streamline it to be faster. Or in times of high volume deadlines, I might have to go back to the other underpainting. So I don't know yet, but that is a good question. It's a question I'm asking myself.
They seem both generative, but in different ways.
Yeah. This one is like system generated, where the other one is artist generated, but I am systematizing the artist imagery. And so it ends up being systematized either way. Yeah, we'll see.
This one feels really playful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed making it. It's like the discovery is just so exciting. I'm like, I have no idea what this is going to look like. And if I was using computers, I could have written these rules. This could easily have become a computer program where I could have input, the potential 24 images and their orientations and the location and the time, and the computer could have generated it immediately. And then I could start playing with the factors of, oh, maybe I want to only have 6 orientations or instead of 8, or maybe I want to do 200 iterations instead of 100, right? Like I could just keep playing with it on a computer, which is something I've been kind of wrestling with for myself a little bit of like, maybe I'm making this harder than it needs to be, but maybe there's also kind of a magic in like a slow unfolding, which is something that we don't get a lot of in our daily life, and I don't have those computer skills, so I'd have to learn them. Which I'm capable of, but that would be it's a barrier. So yeah, I don't know, but it was exciting to do it once. So we'll see if I have patience to keep doing it.
Are there other questions? I have some that I could chime in with, but I don't want to, if there's someone else in the
What
group.
about my students? They're like, we'll just ask you in person. Okay, students, I'll ask you later.
I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Kendra. Oh, sure, go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out how to word it. It's like I know that you have like a need for like this sort of traditional or analog kind of process, like integrating that.
Mhm.
And there's also like this sort of parameter where it's like you don't want to fully like integrate like is that true? Like do you not want to like fully like utilize like a computer, like any sort of computer process?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, that's a good question. And
what's
it's one, yeah, go ahead.
like what exactly is like the limit for like utilizing like a computer?
Mhm. I know, and I so easily could, like I can imagine how, like I don't know how to write code, but I could imagine how the code could be written for this because the factors are just so straightforward that a computer could pick them up really easily. And I'm learning about other artists who do use computers, and so I can kind of see how that would be possible. So that's an unanswered question that I think is half defended by oh, it changing the way that I think, right? By it being slow and watching it unfold for myself, does change the way that I think than if it was just like instantaneous and I could continue to play around with the factors, which is maybe better, maybe not. There is a barrier to, I mean, this is just requiring a bunch of self-reflection, right? There is a barrier to me learning how to do it and just taking the time to do it. But there also is a potential, like just like resistance to our world getting increasingly computer generated, and especially with AI. So I just learned that AI is targeting artists because it's a way to be immediately profitable. And so we artists kind of have to resist, at some point have to resist AI completely replacing us, right? Like, is human creativity important, or can it be replaced by a computer? And I think an artist would argue that human creativity is really important. And so if I give all of my power over to a machine, maybe then the loss of the humanity is too great. So I don't know. It's one to reflect on, but it is something that is worth continuing to explore the more I make this work.
We can continue having that conversation in class.
And continuing having people ask me because it makes me have to think about it too. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. I don't know if you have to cut it right off, Kendra.
No, this is fascinating. Yeah. It makes me think too of other technologies that have disrupted the role of artists, the camera,
Oh yeah, yeah,
uh mass-produced paint for that matter.
yeah.
Um Camera obscuras, like they all kind of have us question our role in all of this.
Right. And if I look back on what the camera did, maybe painters were like, oh no, it's a crisis of painting, which now we can, now that enough time has passed, we can go, oh no, painting survived, like it was fine. And so that's one thing that I find comforting when I think about AI, of like, maybe it's just scary because it's new, and maybe it won't completely demolish a thing that I love so dear, or maybe we'll learn to be friends with it, which a lot of artists learn to be friends with the camera, right? And that's how they make their art. So, it's something that is not inherently a threat to human creativity. Yeah, great.
Love it. On that note, is there any other professional development advice you have for students, since a lot of students will be watching this, I think?
Yeah, I have so much professional development advice because that was another thing, like whenever you lack something in your own education, I think it becomes really meaningful when you have to figure it out for yourself. So it's like when I was an artist, which I think they're doing better now, or when I was a student, I think we're doing better now. The way that we were taught, the focus of all learning, including both undergrad and grad, was just about the art. It was like, how's the art working? What is the art doing? Art, 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 art. And nobody was like, when you graduate, this is what you do with art. And this is how you can get a career and make money and pay your bills so that you can make more art, right? Just practical stuff of like the realities of being an artist. And so the professional practice stuff. So I think that it boils down to three things. One, community, which another way of saying that is network. But I think community is a better word because the people in your community are your friends, right? They're not people you're using to get your career ahead. They're people that you genuinely love. And then you get your careers get ahead together, right? So you have to, before you have that community, or if your community feels like it's too limited, you have to build that community by going to art openings, going to artist talks, introducing yourself to artists, starting your own crit group, starting a podcast. This is a friend of mine did this. I thought this was brilliant. Then you invite people to come on your pod, and artists are like, cool, give me a platform. I'll do, and then you become friends with these artists that wouldn't have had a reason to talk to you otherwise. So community, never stop making the art. So even if you're like, I only have 5 hours a week because I work a full-time job and I've got kids or whatever, I'm the sole income earner for my family and I work a full-time job. Right. So it's like, if anybody knows how to, like, the challenge of that, like, it's me, and it's like, you have to just keep doing it, even if it has to get really small and really short, right? You're like 30 minutes of drawing on a Saturday afternoon is all I can do. If you do that, you'll keep your momentum, and you need your momentum to carry you through the things that are the discovery of what the real kind of valuable work is that you're going to make. So never stop making the work, regardless of the parameters you find yourself in. Network, and then being practical about your business, the business side of things. Track all of your expenses. I have a separate credit card that I use just for art purchases that makes it easy to track. Claim them on your taxes. You can claim a loss for 4 years and get that government money back for losing money on trying to be an artist, which is mostly what your life will be. Eventually you'll start making money and then you'll have to pay taxes, but keep that record, and then you can also track. So good record keeping, getting the taxes back on your money, and reading one book on art business, right? Just don't hand that over to somebody. Don't be the mercy of somebody else doing that for you. Yeah. So thanks for asking.
Awesome. Any other questions? Okay. Oops. Sorry. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for coming. And it was lovely to have you visit us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I appreciate y'all giving me your time. Yeah. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. Take care. See you later.
Bye.